Let's take a look at some Hindu art. So here we have the Lakshmana temple in Khajuraho, India, built during the Chandela dynasty. So the Chandela kings, they built their capital in Khajuraho. And they were really great patrons of the arts. And in fact, in the course of their rule, they built over 80 temples in Khajuraho. There are only 30 left. And in fact, Khajuraho now is no longer a place where people live. The mark of it being a great Chandela capital city is now just these 30 remaining temples that people, come from all over the world to see. So this particular temple was built by the Chandela king Yashovarman, and like almost all temples that we see that are built by kings across many different faiths, it's often that the king will build these temples to legitimize their leadership. This is particularly striking and interesting with Hinduism in the sense that we have to think of what a Hindu temple is, right? A Hindu temple is not a place like a church or a mosque or a synagogue where you would go with a group of other people who also practice your religion, and you would, listen to a preacher or a priest or a rabbi speak, or an imam speak. Rather, it's about a very personal interaction with you and God, because you are basically going to God's house on earth, right? It's really just that you come here, and in this central womb chamber is where the statue of the god will be. And you make offerings, maybe you pray to the god, etc. But it's just that personal interaction, because it's like you're going to God's house. And so for a king to build a temple, it's like, I'm building the greatest, like God's house, and I'm building the greatest house for God. Aren't I a great king? Okay. So speaking of, let's talk a little bit more about the form of this temple. So this is a northern style temple. We know it's a northern style temple because the sort of tower shapes here, the mountain shapes, they have a curved shape to them. Southern style temples would be straight lines like that, sort of more pyramid-like. So this is a northern style temple, and look, very similar to, right, what we saw, these finials at the top sort of have a similar form to what we saw at the Great Stupa, right? Those are Yasti pole and Chhatris. Now these aren't the same thing, but they have, when we look at them, we see a similarity there. Now, in addition to that, we also have to look at the form here. Now, this is, like all Hindu temples, a Panchayatana temple. That means containing 5. And what are the 5 things that this contains? Well, we've got 5 shrines. There's the main shrine in the center in the womb chamber, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 more. So that's 5, and then 5 in the center. So, that's something that you're going to see in common in all Hindu temples, okay? The next thing is that these forms here are meant to mimic the Mount Meru, which was the fictional, it's not necessarily real, but it's in Hindu cosmology, it's where the gods were said to live, Mount Meru. So this is meant to look like that. Additionally, we see forms of the circle and squares all throughout the plan of this temple. And that's very, very important in Hindu cosmology, because circles and squares are considered sort of like divine shapes. Circles representing the universe, and squares representing like life force. Okay? Speaking of circles, what would you do when you come to a temple like this? Well, you would indeed circumambulate it, right? You would walk around it, kind of going as you work your way up these various terraces, right? So again, circumambulation, just like we saw with Buddhism, important in the Hindu faith. Of course, Hinduism is an older faith than Buddhism. Now, let's talk about the reliefs on this temple. This temple is most famous for these Mithuna reliefs, which are these erotic reliefs of people in either of single, largely women in very, sensuous poses, and actually images of people copulating, having sex. So let's talk about the women. We see these contrapposta forms, these forms that really emphasize the sensuality of a woman's body. And that was on purpose, in the sense that this woman is meant to be represent ideal beauty, and her ideal beauty is protective. It's also a symbol, as it often is, as women's bodies often are, of fertility, of growth, and of prosperity. Let's look at the copulating couple now. So copulation symbols, or symbols of people having sex, here are symbols of divine union and moksha. What is moksha? Moksha is the release from samsara. Now, what is samsara? Remember, samsara is, Hindus believe in reincarnation. So samsara is that cycle of life, death, and rebirth, life, death, and rebirth, right? And so you continue on with this all the time until finally, you get it right and you're released from this cycle. And that release is called moksha. And then you get to have divine union with the eternal, right? That's the point. And so, you can see how sex might represent, union. And I will let you figure out why it also represents relief. The Lakshmana temple is a temple to Vishnu, but there are in the reliefs images of other gods. Notably, there's an image of Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, also on this temple. So you would see, as you would circumambulate the temple, you would see these other gods as well. And in addition to that, there would be reliefs that depict the daily life during Chandela time. So just of, mortal people and what their life would like. So not everything would be these sexy images. Okay, so let's move forward. Okay, now here we have another Hindu temple. This is not in India. This is in Cambodia. This is the temple of Angkor Wat. Now, while this is obviously quite a bit larger, way larger than the Lakshmana temple, we do see some similarities in form. In fact, very clear similarities in form. We see that this is also, as I said, like all Hindu temples, a Panchayatana temple, right? In the sense that 1, this is where the central womb room would be, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So, and then the 4 subsidiary shrines, the central shrine, all right? Now, let's talk a little bit about who built this and why, for another similarity with the Lakshmana temple. This was built by the Khmer king Suryavarman, all right? So he builds this temple to Vishnu, right? A Vishnu temple. And as you can see, it is very impressive. I mean, look at this large moat around it. And this is also quite an engineering marvel, in the sense that local rivers and streams were used and diverted in order to create this form. It is massively huge. So again, in terms of, as I said before, why do kings build temples to the gods, especially in Hinduism? Because it shows that I made the best temple for the gods, right? Now, so a couple of interesting things to talk about in addition to just the form. Again, remember, this is, oh, by the way, similarly, right? Northern style temple with the sloping Mount Meru mimicking towers here, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the reliefs that you see here. And before I talk about the reliefs, it's interesting too, because Khmer Hinduism is a little bit different than Hinduism as we see it in India. It's very syncretic. So you're going to see like images of Buddha alongside a Hindu temple. So don't be surprised by this. It's an interesting and a different form of Hinduism. Of course, Hinduism comes to Cambodia again through trade routes, but it's sort of, it melds with other religions as well. Now, as I said, let's talk about the reliefs. Now, the most famous relief is located right here on this wall, and it is the churning of the ocean of milk. Now, this probably requires a little bit of explanation, because if you're not familiar with Hinduism and Hindu iconography, let's talk about it. So, this is a image of Vishnu. Again, remember, this is a Vishnu temple, churning the ocean of milk. And what does that mean? All right, well, here it is. So there's a battle between the gods and the demons. And in order to win the battle, the first thing that has to happen, or what needs to happen, is they need to get this elixir of life. Like, whoever gets it first is going to win. But the problem is that it's located at the bottom of the ocean of milk, and neither the gods nor the demons are strong enough to get it on their own. The only way that they can get it is to work together. So what you have here is Vishnu himself acting like he is, and I have another Mughal painting of this, right? So we have this divine mountain here that is going to be used almost like, again, this is hard to explain because it is more in Indian cooking that you have this, but it's something that you would use, it's like something that's going to use to churn up the ocean by spinning it back and forth. And the way they're going to spin it back and forth is they're going to wrap the divine serpent, Naga, and you can see it better here, around the mountain. And in this one, it's very interesting because Vishnu is actually the mountain itself. And they're going to spin it back and forth and spin it back and forth. And then once they spin it back and forth, the divine elixir of life is going to rise to the surface, and the gods are going to be victorious because they've got this guy right up here who's going to swoop in, scoop up the elixir of life, and they're going to defeat the demons. And so that is the story of the churning of the ocean of milk. All right. But a really amazing relief, even if you don't know the story, in terms of the many, many different types of rhythm and repetition of the images, asymmetrical rhythm, right? Like all of these different ways we see this in this image. Really, really interesting and really quite beautiful. Yeah, I think that's about it. Let's take the last couple minutes to look at Shiva as Nataraja. So here we have Shiva as Lord of the Dance. Shiva, of course, a Hindu god. And remember that our Hindu gods can come in many different forms. They call these avatars, right? So so for example, Vishnu, we just saw a Vishnu temple, can appear in the form of the god king Ram. He can appear in the form of the young amorous Krishna, many different forms of one god. So here we see the god Shiva in his form of the Nataraja. And Nataraja means Lord of the Dance. And indeed, Shiva is dancing here. He's dancing now let's look at the iconography. He's dancing in a ring of fire. He holds fire in his hand. He's holding a drum that is the drum that's beating out the dance of death. Now, this is a dance of death, but it's also a dance of rebirth. Shiva is the destroyer. He is the destroyer god. But while he is destroying, it's also, remember, this is a religion that believes in reincarnation. So destruction is destruction, but it always leads to rebirth, right? It's not just the end of things. Destruction always leads to new growth, right? Okay, so we also see mudras here, right? So Shiva's hands in the characteristic poses of that tell us more information of to have no fear and to promise that liberation is forthwith. Now, this god Shiva would be worshipped. This is Shiva on earth. He would have been, worshippers would give him, offer him food. He would be clothed. He would be dressed with sacred pastes of sandalwood and turmeric. And as we can see here, he actually would be mobile. A pole would be inserted through here, and people would carry him through the streets so he could be worshipped. When and why was this made? This was made during the South Indian Chola dynasty. Queen Sembi and Mahadevi really did work to link the idea of the Nataraja and Shiva in this form with the Chola dynasty becomes a real symbol for the Chola dynasty.